Welcome back. My name is Ted Knutson. I'm the founder of The Transfer Flow, which is the newsletter that we have that analyzes transfers from around the football world every week. And I'm also the founder of what we're calling Variance Betting. We had been asked to do some betting analysis, gambling analysis as part of our normal process around the transfer flow. I thought that it felt fun and natural to be able to do that. If you're just joining us, I did a short video on the preseason lines for the championship. We released that last week. I wanted to be able to get that out before the season started. The season started this past weekend. And so we were able to put that out there. Then today we're going to cover, once again, kind of who I am, why I'm doing this, and then we'll also get stuck into the preseason lines for the English Premier League, which starts next weekend. For me, looking at this, I guess, situation right now, I used to be a former professional sports bettor, and this happened starting back in 2005, so almost 20 years ago. Started in American sports, but my true loves were college football, which I was very good at, and soccer or football of the other variety. Always been an English Premier League fan, I guess, since 1998 when I became a football fan. And I learned that I was pretty good at figuring out which teams were better or worse than the market odds at the time. So I used to be a professional sports bettor. And then when the United States laws changed, I went to a place called Pinnacle or pinnaclesports.com. It is still widely regarded as one of the smartest bookies in the world. It's also one of the few places that in the world that has like deep discount lines. So by a discount line, we mean they have the cheapest prices that you can bet in the whole industry. And I worked there from 2007 to 2014, basically helping build out their entire product suite that was not American football face or American sort of sport facing. Also launched live betting while I was there, rebuilt how the world bets on tennis, and in particular had a huge focus on the world of soccer. So I was R&D manager there, had a lot of experience in combining mathematical models with human trading and gradually sort of beginning to find the path to automate some of those things as well. Then after I left there, I went to work for a gentleman named Matthew Benham, who is the owner of Brentford and also Midtjylland, which was the Danish sister club at the time. Matthew Benham also made his money by running one of the world's smartest sort of sports betting hedge funds or syndicates, as they're called in the gambling world. So sat alongside syndicate traders at the same time. I personally was the lead trader for the English Premier League when I was at Pinnacle. So I have a huge background in gambling. Then fast forward a couple years after that, I started a company called StatsBomb. StatsBomb initially was designed to provide analytical software and tools for football teams or soccer teams to be able to better evaluate players and to be able to do opponent analysis and self-scouting on their own team. But at the same time as doing that, I realized that there are huge holes in the gambling data that people were using to analyze team performance. And I knew this because I was inside the syndicates, and also I had worked for a long time with Opta's data and just knew that we could do better than both of those. So that's what we did inside of StatsBomb. We developed the best data in the world to be able to use for player analysis and personnel analysis, which is a huge use case and very valuable. But also at the same time, some of the world's best syndicates came to us and they started licensing our data to be able to do the gambling space. So my history here is kind of a long and winding run. But over the last 20 years, I've been heavily involved in the gambling space. Even when I wasn't betting, I was sitting alongside people who were and have just this enormous amount of background in kind of best process around this, best practices. And I still enjoy betting on football to some extent. I stopped completely when I was at StatsBomb. Felt like that was a conflict of interest. But now that I'm back out and we're running the transfer flow and this variance betting concept, which will be a premium newsletter that will have weekly releases, we'll give you model information, and then I'll also talk about the bets that I'm actually placing. I'm not selling any tips. I'm not a tipster. I'm not anything like that. But I do love the process of analyzing and talking about the bets that you're making, why you're making, learning from why you might be wrong. Like, you will definitely fuck up in this world. 55% is about as good as you can do on 50-50 lines against the spread or the Asian handicap. And so you're going to lose about half of your bets. But if you win more than half of your bets on 50% lines and low juice, like, you have a chance to become a long-term profitable bettor as long as you're playing at the right places and you find the best prices. So anyway, we're going to talk about all of that, and we're going to keep educating things throughout the course of the season. Today, we're going to get stuck in a little bit about discussing early market lines, preseason models, why models plus humans is the best way to go about betting, and what humans bring as well. Like, there's nothing that like gets the humans out of the way or completely out of the way here of the models. Like, the robots are not there yet. I think that they could be eventually in the future, but that's not the case at the moment. And I'll tell you some story about my history in this area, and we'll talk about a few different markets and a few different wagers that I think are sort of positive value and useful right now to make this week before the season kicks off in the winners market, in the top four market, and also in the relegation battle. Right. So models plus humans. What a model brings for us is a mathematical baseline that takes the past performance of the different teams and tells you approximately how strong they were versus all the other teams in the league. Some models are able to look at attack and defensive ratings inside of that. Some models are tied together so that they actually have worldwide connectivity on how good the teams would be. We had some really funky issues with that when using it to try and analyze players alongside of it, because places like Australia or South America basically never play anybody in North American teams, or the European teams very rarely played North American teams. And so it was difficult to get like a real rating for like how strong those teams were. We could do it next to each other because things like Copa Libertadores is there, and there are some cup competitions where cross-border teams play each other, like the Champions League as well, over and Europa League, and now Europa Conference League. But using that type of information to then sort of predict how good the best players in those leagues might be and how they might be able to succeed in other leagues when they transferred was something that we thought had a lot of value back in the day when we were doing this sort of player analysis and scouring the world for the best players. Models are super useful, but they don't know everything. And in fact, sometimes they're really dumb. But the fact that they're dumb means that, like, if you know what their weaknesses are and if you know what information they're covering, then the humans come in and they add all of the information the model doesn't know that we think is still relevant. So we'll talk about a couple of those specific examples inside of the Premier League betting that we're seeing right now, stuff that, the models are very dumb, but the humans can then layer on information that either helps you to say, oh, this is definitely an exciting bet that I want to place, or the flip side of it is, I know things that the model doesn't, and that means that the value that the model's seeing here, like, I would be very cautious about it, or I think that's non-existent. So we'll cover a couple of those moments as well. First, though, a useful gambling story from behind the scenes back in kind of 2010 to 2014. At Pinnacle, like, preseason lines were not something that we were super excited about. For those of you who don't know about Pinnacle, it's one of the few places that have discount lines. And most of our action, or most of our bets, came on weekly wagers on the teams. And that was really interesting to us. We didn't have what we call a lot of prop bets. So at that time anyway, all the bets on first player to score, or, outrights, or even now you could bet on players to generate expected goals and how many shots they will take and things like that. Like, that's a different world from when I was working in the gambling space. And it was a different world from what Pinnacle was interested in. They were interested in large volumes of bets and good liquidity. They would take sharp action, or sharp meaning bettors that have an advantage and that are probably long-term winners. They would combine all that. So they would have like all the sharps in the world to be able to then try and find the best lines, but then also to potentially take sides on the places where they thought there was value. So anyway, back in the early days, we started to want to post more and more preseason lines, just as a marketing benefit, so that people would come and see something during the off season that they could still bet on for their favorite sport. And in the early years, we were cloning the lines from other places. We would do some basic analysis on, oh, this is the average points scored by these different positions over the course of the last 5 years. Where do we think the teams are going to rank in position level value at the end of the season? You throw up the points totals, over under points total for the season was there, and then you would have the outrights of who would win the league. We just used to get trounced. We were so bad at it. And I think partly because the world had bad lines on it. But at some point, when you're posting those lines as you get towards the season kickoff, and you can bet $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 a bet on those lines, you need to hope that they're a little bit better than somebody's seat of the pants estimates. So when I was back at Pinnacle, I decided, I think in 2013, that I was going to start to do some modeling. I was like, I think we might be able to figure this out. So I think I wrote a piece and I did a podcast saying that, like, people should be betting our preseason lines because we're bad at it and you guys always win. And it was true. It was literally true. So we used to get our asses kicked in the preseason markets. And then when I started modeling it and I used the mathematical models, there were some old school stuff, mostly around shots and kind of weighted shots averages to then rank the teams better, as opposed to even the league table at the end of the season. Goal differential was also, a very useful way to look at it, and that was something we looked at as well. When I started to use the models to be able to grade those teams and rank them better, we realized that the model was a great place to start. And no matter how much we knew about soccer or football or the sport, we didn't know enough to cleanly rank 20 teams in a particular league in their points totals and exactly how we thought they would end up. After we started using the models and then adjusting a little bit for sort of quality of the teams, quality of the transfers that they made during the season, whether they lost good players or brought in new ones that were good, or in particular, whether they lost really top coaches, and then, the model doesn't know that, we started to have a lot more success. And so that was like the big basis for bringing in kind of preseason outright models. Now, for those of you who are like, well, this is stupid because the syndicates have been doing this forever, and why didn't you do that before? The answer was I was working on about 1 billion different sports trying to figure out how everything tied together in the gambling world. And, spinning up live betting and changing how tennis betting worked and trying to figure out simply how to stop losing in live soccer took us 5 years of time and massive amounts of model because it's a time decay problem in offering those lines. So that was where most of the focus was. It was not about season outrights where we took, a tiny fraction of our wagering. It was about, we have 2 billion in liquidity that we're putting through in live soccer. It would be useful for us to win more money there. Or it would be great if we could actually start doing live lines in the NBA and improve our halftime models so that instead of, sort of holding 0.5%, maybe we could hold 1%. Well, it turns out when we fixed the models for halftime and live and did 6 months worth of work on the NBA, we went from not only holding 0.5%, we held 4 additional percent on that. So that was a pretty massive area. Anyway, long story, a slight detour into my history of how we did this and what we did back in the day, like literally a decade ago, but also how we learned. And learning is one of the biggest things that I always loved about sports betting, because you are constantly being tested and you're constantly getting feedback on almost a daily basis of, are we getting better at this? Are our assumptions correct? Can we improve our assumptions? Let's review everything that we've done. And for those of you who follow us over on the transfer flow, like, this is the education that has been happening since 2013 when I started Stats Bomb. And we still review that. We go back and we review all of the transfer predictions that we've made and the players that used to exist and find out, like, plenty of them wash out. Well, why did they wash out? Here in gambling, it's like, well, I lost that bet. Why did I lose that bet? Like, did we get unlucky? Were they missing somebody that we think might be more valuable in the future? Is that something to keep an eye on? So here, we're going to start to talk about 3 different markets in the Premier League for the preseason. We're going to talk about the winners market and where we see value and where we sort of don't see value, or at least where the market implied lines see value. We're going to talk about the top 4, and we're talking about relegation. When I'm saying market implied model, the thing that I'm referring to there is effectively using past closing lines. So where all the lines ended at in the last season, we then say, this is how strong the market thought that these teams were last year. That's a market implied model and a market implied team strength rating. For some people, you're like, oh, that's pretty basic because you've been around the gambling space for a long time. For those of you who are new, this is one of the key models or the foundational models that we would use in kind of syndicate betting or even in running a sports book, to be able to have some sort of baseline for how good the world has thought these teams are against each other as well. So you kind of tie it all together, even if they haven't played. this team is this strong, this team is this strong, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes you use historic elements around it. Sometimes you use budget. It's a starting point. It is not the be all and end all of models. And in fact, one of the reasons why we're using it in variance betting is because it gives people something that they can kind of recreate for other potential leagues. So here in our weekly newsletter, we'll give you the market implied model ratings that exist there. So we'll tell you kind of what we're seeing in the space, and then you guys can use it and apply it to your own betting. So it's teaching you how to fish effectively is what we want to do. But if we're doing it for two leagues, the English Premier League and the English Championship, and then you want to go out and then sort of learn how to build these models yourselves, we may do a course on that, and then apply that elsewhere. You'll be able to do it. It doesn't take extremely expensive data subscription to be able to do, but it is still one of the best indicators for how the gambling world thinks these teams are going to perform in the future, or particularly have performed in the past at any particular moment. So in the winners market, we're seeing some value in a couple of different places. And I wanted to talk about this because there's a hype cycle, and teams in particular are loud about their own team. And usually at the beginning of the season, they're very optimistic about how those teams are going to perform. In this case, we're going to talk about three different teams that are intriguing, and one not to bet on, and one definitely to bet on, and then the third one is uncertainty, effectively. So our models right now in the winners market think that Manchester City are 60% to win, maybe a little bit better than that. In fact, maybe they're like 62% to win. So when we look at the market out there, if you're seeing that it's better than 62%, and you can find out the odds conversions on different odds conversion sites. So like if you type in, percent to decimal odds, like there'll be a variety of different places already on the internet that will convert that information for you. One of the things that I have found very difficult in my career is talking to people about particular odds styles that are offered in different worldwide markets. So if you ever want your mind blown, go ahead and look up Malaysian odds and find out what Malaysian odds format looks like. Because when I initially was figuring out how to get more worldwide customers to Pinnacle, what we found was the most important thing was to make them comfortable with the odds format that they are seeing, and make it the same format that they're used to seeing locally. So fractional odds make no sense for a bookie that posts all of their prices in pennies. Like fractional odds are basically impossible. So we got rid of fractional odds completely off the website. They might have put it back, but I thought that was like the dumbest thing ever. You can run in decimal odds. You can run in Hong Kong odds. You can run in American odds, which are goofy to anybody that's running decimal or Hong Kong. And then you get to Malaysian odds, which are like American odds, but have a negative sign around them. They're insane. So anyway, the point of talking about things in percentages right now versus the market is so that you can go out there, and whatever market you're in, whatever jurisdiction you're seeing this in, you can then put that type of info into the odds converter and be like, oh, that's what that means. As opposed to me trying to cover 4 or 5 different odds formats that you're looking at and saying, oh, okay, this is like super confusing. I have no idea what that idiot's talking about, or it becomes a much longer video. Right. So back to the winner model. So we think that City are actually pretty significant value in what we're seeing. If you're looking for different places to find, different websites, different bookies to compare the odds around, usually Odds Checker is the one that I use off the top, just to get an idea from market pricing. There are other ones that you can use. In the United States, there's a couple different places as well. I assume Covers probably still has that type of info. Again, line shopping is super important. Like if you can save yourself a penny or two, or you can get better prices around the internet, and you can still do easy bankroll management, and you have the accessibility of these different places to bet, like it will improve your end of year portfolio and your winnings every single time. Maybe you lose a little less when you bet on this, or maybe you win a little bit more. So odds comparison, very useful. Go to Odds Checker, look around at the bookies to find the different odds formats, the different lines that are posted there, and then try to bet the best line that you can find for any particular wager. So we like Manchester City on this. We think that there's definitely better than a 50% chance that they're going to win the league next year. The other side of this is the Arsenal wager. So Arsenal, our model has them at about 23%, 24%. When I was looking at the odds earlier, like Arsenal in that market are probably slightly overvalued. And the reason why that's true is because they performed really well last year, right? But really well versus historic Manchester City versus Arsenal not necessarily making that many moves in the transfer market this year. Like they're pretty good. They're not a lot. It's just tough to beat Pep at the end of the day. I think that's the most challenging bit. So while they may have been toe-to-toe last year, like if you look at a multi-year performance, like how repeatable is that performance? Do they have the depth to be able to pull that off? Like if Bukayo Saka got injured, what happens to Arsenal? Great question. Martin Odegaard, sort of similar question. It seems like Manchester City can, have replacement players you've never heard of suddenly in there, and Pep's winning another title over and over again. So we like Manchester City for the title, and we kind of like not Arsenal for the title. And so if you have the ability to bet against Arsenal to win the Premier League, if you can find that wager, we think that, again, they're only about 23% to win the league. So like there's pretty significant value out there in the market, in some places anyway. But there's actually a pretty big distribution here as well. Like when we're looking at the odds, you're seeing things like 2.9 is the top odds for Arsenal winning the league, but then some places are down at 2.63, 2.62. So like there's a pretty big distribution around that. It kind of means that there's actually possibly good arguments about whether or not they're likely to win or not. There was some Liverpool value in the market earlier in the year, but so like Liverpool at sort of 9-1 to win. The caution I have there is like the model doesn't know that Jurgen Klopp is gone, and maybe Arne Slot is good. Maybe he's great. It's difficult to imagine him being the second coming of Jurgen Klopp or replicating Klopp's performances. Not to say it's impossible, but that unknown element means that there might have been uncertainty and a lack of value there before. Now knowing that they've changed coach and you're just not sure what the next set of performance looks like, that's something that I would choose to avoid. Pretty straightforward stuff. So that takes care of the winners market. In the top four, we're also seeing some interesting elements. Like top four in the Premier League feels like it should be highly variable. It feels like it should be chaotic, but it hasn't necessarily been that way recently. And even throughout its history, like you'll see some teams come in and then some teams slide back out. At this point, given the Newcastle ownership, like it should be something like 7 teams deep. And then Aston Villa snuck in last year, which is crazy. And actually sort of overperformed, even though I think Unai Emery has a history of overperforming expected goals. That doesn't mean that it's sustainable for the long term, meaning a multi-year term as opposed to a single season. And also, Villa have spent a lot of money in the transfer market. Whether that's good money or not is an open question. They now have to have European competition in the Champions League while also competing in a very competitive Premier League once again. So I think that's an interesting point. It feels like it should be a 7 deep sort of competition for top four. But when we look at the odds formats and we look at the market implied lines, it's less than that. Basically, looking at the top four ratings, City still have probably some value, but it's not a thing that I would bet because you have so much money that is pushed into a 1.1 price. So this is a little bit about bankroll management. We don't want to bet sort of huge favorites. Like you don't want to have to pay $100 or £100 and lock up £100 for the course of a season in order to just win 10 pounds back or $10 back. That right now is not great bankroll management for us. Looking at other teams like Arsenal also seem to have some value in that market. But again, like you're sort of looking at a 5-1. So when we look at top four odds, yes, we think Arsenal are probably like 90+% to be in the top four. And so there's still value there. You just have to be careful about bankroll management. The other team that we think are sort of 90+% are Liverpool to be in the top four. Now, they have the biggest value in the top four ratings, but the caution element here is Arne Slot again. It's probably worth a small wager to take advantage of that. but it's not a large wager where you're excited about it. The two teams that are sort of inverted around that, and in fact, there's three. I think Manchester United, like we think, are overrated by the market, continue to be overrated by the market. And I made a joke last time saying that United actually have better odds in the market implied model to be relegated versus to win. And I don't think that that's necessarily untrue. Like if you look at the historic performances of Manchester United since Alex Ferguson left, they haven't even been top two in expected goals, and that's kind of staggering. Even though they've sort of snuck into a couple of top two performances, but they've never really competed for the Premier League since that time. So that's over a decade. That's like 11 years, and the model will just sort of chuck that behind. It knows that Manchester United are rich, but they're just like classically underperforming. So United look like they're overvalued. If you wanted to be able to put a small amount of money on not Manchester United to make the top four, that's pretty interesting. Newcastle also seem to be like slightly overrated by the market. Thinner squad, not an aggressive transfer summer, like not really bolstering the depth there. So not Newcastle United to make the top four looks like a pretty decent wager there as well. And the last one is Chelsea. And we're going to talk about it when we do grades for the transfer flow, but like the Chelsea summer is insane. and I think the Chelsea squad management is insane. Like nobody knows what to predict there. If you wanted to be a little bit punchy, like you could put a wager on not Chelsea to make top four, but it's not something I'm like super excited about because I think there is a lot of talent. If Pochettino were there, I actually would be on Chelsea in top four because they were coming around and their performances at the end of the year were starting to look legit. But since Maresca's there, I think that that's one where we just have to say we don't know enough to say that that's good. So that's the top four market. It's not a comfortable market because of the sizing that you have to be. Like the three teams that you really like, you're sort of our decent sized favorites. So you're locking up a bunch of your bankroll for the whole season. The teams that we don't like, you're betting not them, which is also decent sized favorites. That happens in the Premier League. Like, the outright markets should be moderately optimized for, the probabilities. It should be one of the best markets in the world. It's not always. And in fact, like in some cases, we're finding a lot of value, but we have to worry about managing this stuff throughout the course of the season as well. The last market that we're going to take a look at is the relegation market. The relegation market is the place that the model probably knows the least information about because you've got three teams that have just come up and it doesn't know exactly how they're going to perform. It knows how they looked in the championship last year. And in fact, those three teams were basically the same ratings and expected goals ratings when we look at the historic from last season. There were four really good teams in the championship last year. Three of them went up, and the fourth one is Leeds. And if you watch the championship one, like we thought there was good value in Leeds to win or be promoted in those betting markets in the preseason. For the relegation model, we have some discussion and some context here. So the thing that the relegation model, I think, is the team that's most excited by is maybe Southampton. It thinks that Southampton are 80% to be relegated, which I think is very punchy. I think that might be more like a 60%. But when you look at the markets, like 60% to be relegated is still pretty high. Leicester are in that space as well, 62%. And then Ipswich are sort of 53%. I'm not sure I agree on that Ipswich one either. Like this is the area where you really have to bring in a lot of knowledge and a lot of context to how good these teams were last year. And when I see those numbers, I think they're all kind of 60 to 70% potential to be relegated. I'm not sure that anybody's had like an awesome summer that makes me excited to bet them. Leicester have lost their coach. So like that's another open question as to like how they'll perform. The market is certainly downgraded Leicester versus those other two teams because Maresca's gone. I don't even know if that makes sense or not, but that's there. The other thing the model, let's see, the next place the model sees value is around Crystal Palace. I don't agree with that at all. I think Palace are pretty good. I think they have a great young coach. I think that their summer's been challenging, but they have proven themselves good enough at recruiting to make me relatively confident that they can replace some genuinely great players. So, if Mark Gahey goes and Olisa is already gone, and presumably they're not going to sell Eza as well, and there hasn't been that much noise in the transfer market. Maybe that's okay, but like again, we're seeing things like it thinks they're 19% to be relegated, and the market thinks that they're like 10% to be relegated. I don't think that these things add up to like a really positive bet, in my opinion. But if you wanted a long shot, maybe that one there. The one that I am a little more interested and excited by, and this is not a model pick. This is one where I think the model is neutral on, but I think that there's more value in this given what they look like at the end of the season, also what their expected goals ratings look like versus the market implied. Was I think Wolves are a decent bet. I think when I looked at it, it was somewhere between 4 and 5 to 1 to go down. I think that if you're looking for an outside team, not of the promoted teams, that's most likely to be relegated, it's them. I think the other one that I'm looking at is Everton for not being relegated. I think that when people looked at it, like Everton have a very low chance of being relegated. That's fine. I think that Sean Dyche can basically, coach that team with his eyes closed, and they'll be okay unless they get a bunch of points deductions. So that's more of a complexity. These aren't particularly exciting anywhere, I don't think. Maybe there's some value in Southampton. The model thinks that there is. And I personally think that Wolves have like a small wager. But again, these are like tiny sized bets that I would make because we want to make sure that we have most of our betting bankroll available for the game by game, week by week season. Because if you're a plus EV better, even if you're finding good value in the preseason, you still want to be able to turn it over 38 times or however many times you're wagering during the course of the year on this league, as opposed to locking it up for one bet for the entire course of the season. That's the balance between those two. I hope you've enjoyed everything. For those of you who are interested in the future gambling content, I'm going on holiday for a couple weeks. I have deserved this holiday for about 8 years. Now that I'm out of Stats Mom, I am going to take that holiday. We will be back at the end of August to start the weekly newsletter that will give you the market implied odds for the Premier League and the Championship. And we will also be doing a weekly podcast. I don't know if I'm going to have a guest, but we'll talk about the wagers. Maybe we'll look at creating a Discord community around the Variance Betting newsletter as well. And then obviously the transfer flow is out there. It will continue updating the entire time. So if you're interested in more content like this, first of all, comment, tell your friends. We really appreciate that. And the transferflow.com/subscribe is where you'll find that. We do a great newsletter. People have said amazing things. And not only is it fans that are following this, but we have literally hundreds of people who work inside the football industry that are following the daily newsletter and the podcast because they love the information and they're getting insight that they can't get from anywhere else in the media or pretty much the world. So that's what we created. The feedback has been awesome. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll talk to you again in a couple weeks. Bye.